The ROADHOG rework has finally been revealed, with a new signature ability called Pigpen. We've been waiting for a long time, and while on the surface it doesn't seem crazy, there's a whole ton of new functionality added to his kit. Make sure to use the link in the description below to get access to a GameLeap membership. There are tons of guides from coaches and top players like me to help you master your favorite heroes, even if they're not the best right now. Check it out and enjoy the video. Let's get started right away with the new ability, which is a massive new addition to his playstyle. Pigpen, a trap-based ability, is now on your Take a Breather ability slot, which has now been moved to your secondary fire. There's a lot of crazy changes, one of them being the previous mid-range scrap shot he had on a shotgun, now completely removed. But as for the new ability, it works as an electrocuting trap which applies a 40% movement slow when it activates. 40% is a good number, it's even better than May's current primary fire slow. It also deals damage over time while activated, through an electrocuting effect. The way it activates is similar to Junkrat's. It has to sink into the ground first, then gets activated when someone walks up within 2 meters of it. The damage against slowing radius then expands to almost 4 meters, so it can definitely cover a whole choke point and any doorway for sure. It can also be shot and killed before it gets activated, and because it's only at 100 HP, just like Junkrat's trap, it's a lot more counterplayable. There's too many similarities, but considering they're both Junkers, it makes sense. When you consider how much you can do with the ability against enemies, it's not going to be totally amazing. Most players pushing against the ROADHOG will watch their feet at choke points, since that's where the trap is best used compared to on the flank. The ability does 60 damage upon activation, and then 30 damage per second for 3 seconds afterwards. This deals a maximum of 150 damage, and while it's a hefty number, it's ideal to focus on the slowing effect to punish fast-moving teams. It will definitely dissuade flankers from pushing if you put on the side routes. 60 instant damage and a ticking of 30 every second is going to force them to look for health packs or some help from their supports, but it's still probably best saved for choke points with a lot of players because it's just a slowing effect, as opposed to the hindering or rooting effect of Cassidy and Junkrat's crowd control abilities. The cooldown is also a pretty hefty 12 seconds for an ability that can be destroyed at only 100 health, and can also be escaped through movement cooldowns or even just raw out healing. Most tanks won't be too phased by the slow, although it's still good at forcing abilities. But the real solid way to use the trap is to combine it with your age-old hook combo, which hasn't been changed at all. The consistent one-shot for ROADHOG has been dead for a while now, but now that there's an extra damaging ability in his kit, that's a whole new way to 100% confirm the kill on whoever you hook. 60 instant damage on the trigger is pretty great, and since his primary fire hasn't been nerfed in overall damage, that's already over 200 HP. It's looking good for a more solo-based ROADHOG style, since you're not going to be getting all your hook confirms against the enemy tank, who can block your hooks and stun you out of them still. And moving on to the new ability, the new primary fire has gotten a solid rework to it, and while it's obviously going to be very different if you lose a whole secondary fire to your main gun, there's a lot more to his gun now that also makes him a lot more effective at long range and close range. He's gotten an increase in his total overall damage, both in his maximum damage and in his damage per second, but in exchange for a pretty different new fire type. It's been changed at a pretty fundamental level, and although it's still a scrap type shotgun, there's now a completely different spread. Now ROADHOG shoots 4 large projectiles in the center of his shot, in addition to a normal shotgun spread of the now reduced 16 shots. It used to be 25. The bigger projectiles in the middle of the shot and overall damage increase would make this an insane buff, and his critical damage multiplier has been pulled back because of that, from 2 to 1.5. This means that a shotgun blast to the head won't completely delete a tank in 2 shots, but will still allow you to one-shot squishies. You'll still be aiming the gun the same, but because of those projectiles in the middle of your shot, you'll be doing a lot more consistent damage at range, even if it's only a maximum of 60 if you hit all those 4 shots. It's definitely a weird new change, but it looks quite good for him in terms of his pure damage output. The one-shot is still there and might even be possible without the help of the Pigpen, bringing back a lot of his old lethality. And finally, with Take a Breather change to the secondary fire, it's not just a small button change, it's now on a resource meter, just like Diva's Defense Matrix and even Moira's Healing Grasp. Take a Breather now heals 150 heals per second for a maximum of 450 healing at full charge. The full charge is a bit hefty, but generally better than before, since it now charges up in 12 seconds. If every time you use the maximum charge, it's 100 more healing than before, for 4 extra seconds. Looking at the ratio between the healing amount and the cooldown, it's pretty close, so there's not a lot of maximum healing that's missing. There are still 2 adjustments to the ability that bring it down a bit so it's not too busted. Firstly, the heal boost effect after ending is now completely gone. It definitely wasn't something that felt natural to ROADHOG's kit, since being fully pocketed by heals isn't really the playstyle he wants to go for. He doesn't have the frontline breaking potential that Malgo or Orisa have. He'll just end up feeding a lot of ultimates. On top of that, the damage reduction you receive during your heal has been reduced from 50% to 30%. If you consider that you have it available every second if you so wish, it's a good drawback to a much more flexible ability. It's looking great for Hog to have a lot more options to approach the enemy, although he still has a lot of the same weaknesses. Anti-nade will still mess him up in the mid-fight. You'll also have to be a bit more careful around high damage abilities like Diva's Self-Destruct. With only 30% damage reduction, you won't be able to tank it anymore if you stand right next to it. You'll only be able to survive now as ROADHOG if you get just a bit further away before you activate the heal, but usually you shouldn't be tanking 1000 damage anyway. All of these changes make ROADHOG a lot better, but he still retains his identity. The biggest thing that stands out in terms of actually changing his viability is his new primary fire. His damage per second was already good, so his shield busting and even tank pressure is still basically the same and improved, excluding headshots on tanks. He now has both close range and long range pressure in the same shot, which is pretty ideal for laying down consistent pressure on your enemies. There was a bit of a rough spot for ROADHOG between his 2 fire types, where your target wouldn't be an ideal range for your shotgun, nor was it far enough for your secondary fire scrap ball to explode and deal 100 more damage. Now you'll be doing more consistent damage every time you shoot, although you will lose those amazing secondary fire explosions right at the perfect mid-range. Luckily, although it can be less flashy, you'll be chunking damage more often at that range. It won't just be a random skill shot that also depends on your opponent's movement, hitbox, and abilities. But is this rework enough to make him actually contend against stronger tanks and especially across all ranks? Firstly, his damage has been increased outside of his lower critical damage multiplier, which means he'll be doing even more insane damage against shields and generally against big targets. Bastion in his turret form is a great example of a hero that doesn't have a front-facing critical hitbox, meaning ROADHOG won't be missing out on the double damage headshots that mostly everyone else can get, but he really doesn't need it to be super strong, considering he has a consistent one-shot if he hits his hook with his new Pigpen ability to bolster the damage and follow-up. But generally speaking, he hasn't been given any new weaknesses. It's looking pretty good so far. The only thing he can do worse now is tank single instances of damage, which once again isn't an ideal thing to be taking all the time. 30% is still super solid considering it's also a heal, but you'll definitely be in trouble if you're using it too much. I can easily see new players not managing the heal resource well. You'll almost always want to have a third left in the tank to heal up if you're stuck in the mid-fight. It'll be really tempting to want to heal all the way down to the bottom of your resource, but keep in mind that your healing won't be very effective at all if you're below 1/3 left. Just 150 health or below is barely enough to keep you going compared to other tanks, and honestly, now that you only receive 30% damage reduction, you'll definitely want to be avoiding damage while healing as much as you can. But the real important thing to appreciate about his new style is that he has legitimately shrugged off his mortal shackles and become free from some of his counters, namely anyone who can stun his heal. Antibiotic Nade and Junker Queen's Rampage will still mark him for death, but most tanks with an anti on them have to fall back anyway. Now that ROADHOG even has a zoning tool through his trap, which will actually be super useful defensively when you have to fall back from a position, he's way harder to confirm the kill on, and also a lot harder to lock out of the fight and completely force away. His new healing mechanic means that getting stunned is now a minor inconvenience. You'll still want to avoid stuns as much as possible, since you definitely much rather not get hit by the follow-up damage that you're too busy being stunned to dodge or heal through. As for one of his biggest counters because of the stun, pitting him up against Orisa, the fact that he can now play in her mid-range and trade damage with her without being at risk of losing his one survivability cooldown is definitely amazing for the matchup. With ROADHOG's big hitbox, even with the greatest of movement, you're still massively at the mercy of your opponent's skill level. If they can't hit a ROADHOG, they deserve to lose the opportunity. But ROADHOG is just so massive that you basically have to rely on your enemies to blunder canceling your healing with their spear or rock or even sleep dart. Now you can even bait their abilities and weave your healing into your gameplay so you can keep looking for hooks whenever you want, and also looking for some great pod shots with your new primary fire. I haven't really mentioned the trap too much, and ironically it's one of the least impactful parts of his new rework. Although it seems similar to Ravenous Vortex, they're definitely different and both very situational. Ravenous Vortex has negligible damage, and the gravity effect only works against some heroes well. Even Echo and Pharah have consistent ways to escape the zone, making it better against heroes like Genji and Winston, to force them out of the fight where they can't do much, compared to the big spammers of Echo and Pharah who will do a lot no matter where they are on the map. It's not the best slowing ability, but it is a slow that you can put down at will. That's the weakness of Pigpen, because it's a trap and it can be destroyed. Whenever you're playing against the ROADHOG, you'll be looking for the trap. It's got a lot of counterplay, and it definitely doesn't seem like a game-breaking ability. It probably won't be detonated most of the time. But as for the ROADHOG players themselves, there will be a lot of innovation in how you place the trap and good spots where they're hard to expect. But considering this is now a trap ability on a tank, it's going to get pretty weird when counterplays start happening. I don't foresee the ability being amazing, but if it does manage to activate without being broken, it's one of the greatest zoning tools in the game. Considering how good Sojourn's Disruptor Shot effect used to be with the slow, and how it still is a great damaging and choke point controlling ability right now, it makes a lot of sense. And right now, as rush comps and brawl comps get more popular, it's pretty good to have an ability that can damage a lot of people at once. All in all, this rework has made him a lot better, and actually kept his playstyle pretty similar to before. It'll definitely take some time to adjust, but as more people try out ROADHOG, I can easily see some of the more skilled veteran hog players with insane hook accuracy do good work with him, although he can still get absolutely trolled by CC and the high damage rush comps featuring Bastion and Sigma that are running around pretty rampant. And that's it for the rework so far, but more balance changes are to come with the new patch, so stay tuned to the channel for that, and I'll see you next time.